Hello and welcome to another free VFX tutorial. My name is Win and today we are going to be doing a hologram effect, which is pretty cool. I'm looking forward to this one. This is probably one of the more fun ones I've done. It's pretty hectic on the node-based compositing. There's a lot of steps to look at here. There's a lot of different color correction assets going on, a bit of motion tracking in the hologram and a bit of texturing, and it ended up looking pretty good. So without further ado, let's get started on this tutorial. So first thing you want to do is fire up a new Blender file, blank Blender file. Now, once we've loaded a blank Blender file, you're going to want to do the motion tracking first, just so you have a basis for what you're going to do in your scene. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch to the motion tracking scene, and then I am going to open my footage by clicking the Open button. I'm then going to go to my source footage directory and then find the footage that I would like to add my hologram to. In my case, it's this piece of footage here, so I'm going to hit Open Clip. Once you've opened the clip, the best thing to do first is to set your scene frames so that the scene has the same frame rate and the same frame range as what you have in your footage. So I'm going to click Set Scene Frames, and then I'm going to scrub through to where I want my sequence to start. In my case, it is about 305, and then I'm going to go down to the footage settings on the right hand pane and then change the frame offset to 305. Now that I've done that, my footage starts there. Now I don't want it to be quite that long. Actually, maybe I'll go back a few frames. I'll start at 270 perhaps. Okay, that's fine. Maybe even earlier than that, 250. Oh, not 2510, 250. Okay, and then I'll go right up until that goes out of frame. So I'll finish it at 114, and I'll just change that by changing the end frame to 114. So now we have our sequence ready to go, and we can start motion tracking it. Now for this task, we want to make sure we are doing a planar motion track. The best way to do this is by picking tracking points that are all on the same plane, which is this plane, because we're going to add the hologram there, and then going ahead and tracking them in a coplanar fashion, and then adding a plane track in the soft. So the way we do that is we'll just switch our tracking type to blurry footage, because that generally works better. You can also use fast motion, whichever rows your boat essentially, or you can use planar if you want to go ahead and track planar straight onto the mesh. It's better for some sort of tracking situations, like if I control click, I can set my planar track, but in my case I'm going to select blurry footage, and I'm going to go ahead and make some points on my footage. Now I'm just pressing control and then clicking in sections of the footage and making my markers. Now generally for a scene like this, you would put a marker in each corner of what you were trying to track, but the best way to do it is to just have as many markers as you can on the region that you were tracking, and making sure they are all coplanar, that is, they are all sitting on that flat surface that you want your planar track to be on. Now that's definitely enough points, so I'm just going to hit A twice to select all of those points. I'm going to go ahead and track them backwards. Very nice, and I'm going to go back to 79 where I started tracking and track them forwards. Very good. So we have a clean track. They're sticking to the wall. If you want to see them a little bit easier, what you can do is go down to this marker display panel in the bottom right corner of the right panel and disable path, just so you can have a look how they're sticking to the footage. I like to hit Alt A just to animate, have a little bit of scrub through that. Now that looks pretty good to me. One thing that's nice to always do, no matter what project you're doing, in our project it's not going to make much of a difference, but anyway, I'm going to make sure I set my camera settings. It's a good practice to have for when you do start 3D tracking. So I'm going to go expand camera, change it to my camera which I used, which was a Canon APS-C, and my lens to be 18mm, which is the lens size that I was using at the time. I'm then ready to create my planar track, so I'm going to switch to the Solve tab on the left hand side here, and I'm going to expand plane track, click Create Plane Track, and then there it is. Now when you're aligning plane tracks, it's good to have a straight line so you know exactly where you're lining the plane track up to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this top corner up with this corner here. I'm going to line this corner up with this corner here, and I'm going to line this side up down there, and this side down the bottom there. It's about straight at that section of the wall. Then if we scrub through, we'll see that planar track is sticking right onto our footage, which is exactly what we want it to do. So that's a very nice planar track. Now that we've got our planar track sorted, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and name that planar track. The way we're going to do that is we're going to go to plane track on the right hand panel. We're going to expand it. We're going to change it to Hologram and hit enter. So our tracking is now done. Now the other thing I'm going to do just before I leave the tracking pane is I'm going to add a mask track. The way I do that is adding tracking to this post so that when it scrubs through and obscures the hologram, I can mask out the post. Now you'll see in this footage, in my original footage, that post goes in front of the hologram, so it masks it out, which we're going to do here too. So to do that, we're going to move our planar track points just so that they're past that post, just so I can show you a bit of cheeky masking. Alright, that's much better. Okay, so now that it goes behind the post, I'm going to add 2 track points to the post. So I'm going to switch back to track. I'm going to control click. I'm going to go back to frame 1. I'm going to zoom in using the scroll wheel. I'm going to control click here, control click down here. And we'll just use those two and just give them a good old track. And they've made it all the way through, which is good. I don't know what this point here is doing, so I'm going to delete that. And there you go. You have your 2 track points, which we are going to use for the mask. And that's just perfect. Now, the thing we're going to do with these 2 track points before we get out of this screen is we're just going to name them. So I'm going to select this one, click up here on the track panel, name this one top mask. I'm going to right click on this bottom one and name it bottom mask. That's fine. Now, what you want to do now is Control S, save your project so you don't lose it. This is probably the most important point in the tutorial. Okay, project is saved. We have done all of our motion tracking and we are ready to go into the compositor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to the scene selection, screen layout selection, change this to compositing. And then I'm going to use this scene compositor. So I'm going to check use nodes, check backdrop, and that's all fine. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to this panel on the side and I'm going to change the settings so that our scene renders better and faster. Now I have a graphics card which I'm going to use for OpenCL acceleration in the compositor. So I'm going to tick OpenCL. Generally, if you do have a graphics card in your computer, you will want to tick this. I'm going to change edit to low so that it performs a bit faster, and I'm going to change the number of chunks. No, I'll keep it to 256, so that's fine. Back in the compositor, I'm going to hit A to select none. I'm going to right click render layers, delete it, so that we just have this composite node. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my footage. So I'm going to shift A, input, movie clip, select my movie clip as it is, and then I'm going to shift A, distort, and then I'm going to scale. I'm going to feed that image into this one and I'm going to change it to render size and then plug that image into the composite. The next thing I'm going to do is add a viewer so we can have a look at what we are doing. I'm going to hit Shift A, output, viewer, plug that straight in there, and as you can see, our footage can be scrubbed through effectively. Now comes the time when we have to add the hologram. So to do this, what we're going to do is we are first going to Shift A, add input image, choose our footage. Now this footage can just be a picture, which is what I'm doing, or you can use movie footage. Say if you wanted to create a news report, hologram, or something along those lines. So I'm going to open my image, then I'm going to Shift A, add a distort plane track deform node. I'm going to input that image into it. I'm going to tick motion blur, and then I'm going to select my footage. I'm going to select camera as the object and select hologram as the plane. I'm then going to output that image, and I'm going to Shift A, add a color mix node. Actually, no, I'll delete that. I'm going to add a color alpha over node. I'm going to plug that. Actually, a neat trick, if you want to combine two node groups like this, node links, just hold shift and then click and drag over them, and then you can add this alpha over node before it. So I'm going to put this image on top of that alpha node over node, and what haven't I done to this image is I have not render size scaled it. So I'm going to Shift D, duplicate this scale node, plug it straight back in, and then it looks like our image is sticking to the footage, which is exactly what we want. So that's our first step towards having a hologram. The next steps start to get a bit more involved. So this is the part where we actually start to integrate the hologram with the scene. Now the first step to this integration is changing this, what was I going to say? The first step is changing this to look like the color of a hologram. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Shift add a color curves node, RGB curves. Plug that in there. I'm going to up the brightness of that one, just so it's a bit overcast. I'm going to switch to the B channel. I'm going to up that big time. And then I'm going to switch to the G channel, and I'm also going to up that. So that will do for now. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is this alpha over node. I've decided I don't want the alpha over node. What I'm going to use instead is a mix node. We could use a math node, they do the same thing. A mix node is just a GPU accelerated way of compositing two elements together. So I'm going to add a mix node, change the type to add, which is a mathematical equation per pixel. Put this one on the bottom, put this one on the top, and then plug this one back into these two outputs, and then go ahead and delete this alpha over node. That's much better. Alright, it's already starting to look a little bit like a hologram. So I'm going to drop that factor down to 0.773 if you like, and we have a semi-transparent plane sitting on the side of the building. Pretty cool. Anyway, next step is to change our hologram so that it looks a bit more bloomy. Bloom is the best effect to add when you are making a hologram. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to Shift A, add a filter blur node. I'm going to set the type to fast Gaussian. I'm going to change the X and Y to 36 and 36. And I'm going to plug this image into that one. Sorry, before the scale. I'm going to Shift A, add a color mix node. I'm going to put this image in the bottom, put this image in the top, change it to add, and plug that back into the scale. Suddenly we have some nice bloom. I might dial that down a bit, make it 24. Might look a little bit better. Alright, so that's looking pretty nice. The other thing that holograms always have is they have these little streaks. If you look in movies, they'll have lines going through them. So the way I'm going to emulate that is using a texture, a repeating tile texture. So I'm going to Shift A, add input texture, and I'm just going to leave that there for now. And then I'm going to jump over to this panel over here, switch to the texture tab, and then change the type to wood. These settings are fine. Sign is fine. That's all fine. We're going to leave it how it is. We're going to jump back into the compositor, and I'm going to hit Control Up so we get a full view of the compositor. That's Control Up arrow. And then I'm going to select text, which is the texture we made. Now, this texture is currently rotated. The exact value is 30 degrees. That's because Blender assigns this value because it is what's most useful when you're texturing objects in 3D. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and rotate it. So I'm going to Shift A, add a distort, rotate, plug the value into the image, and then I'm going to change degrees to -30. That's fine. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a node, add a math node, so Shift A, converter, math. I'm going to plug it in right here, set the type to multiply, and then plug the image value straight in. Now, that's looking like a little bit wrong because it's rotated the wrong direction. So I'm going to set the degree value to 30 because I think that was the right direction. Yes, that's much better. Okay, so now we are going to go and change this texture so that it is the right scale for the image that we're using. So I'm going to grab this scale mapping value, click it, and the X and Y I'm going to change to 5. Maybe a bit more, maybe 10. Also, we deformed the plane and then we added our texture to it. We should have done it the other way around. So instead of plugging this multiply node in here, I'm going to pull these two sockets out, connect this back to there, and then instead put it before the plane track deform. That will be a lot nicer. That's better. Now we don't have to have quite that scale, that means, so I'll dial that back to 5. And now the only thing we have to do is make sure that this texture is covering the entire hologram. So I'm going to Shift Add a distort scale node, put it in there, and I'm going to change to 2 and 2 the values. Maybe a bit more, maybe we'll go 3 and 3. And that's covering the whole image now. And I'll just adjust this value. Whoop. More like 15 degrees it looks. Why would that be? Oh well, anyway, no matter, 15 degrees it is. So I'm going to bump up this Y scale until I'm happy with how many lines are getting shoved in there. Maybe 7. And then I will bump that up to 20. No, lower. 10. Maybe 12. Beautiful. Rightio. So we have a hologram. We have what appears to be a flickering above the hologram. Now what we need to do to that is another step, which we need to add back in the details that we have lost. Now this is important because if we don't add back in the details that we've lost, it ends up looking unreadable, and an unreadable hologram isn't very fun. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a math node. It's going to be an add node, and I'm going to dial down the value until it's 0.05, I'll say. Great. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe we'll change that to a multiply node. And we'll change it to 0.1. This will just help to darken down that hologram a little bit. We'll go 0.5 perhaps. Yeah, 0.5, that looks schmick. That's good. Okay. Anyway, we've got our scene, we've got a hologram in there, and it's looking very nice. Now, what we might want to do also is before this texture goes in, we'll just go ahead and add a converter, a color ramp node, and then we can just up this lower value. And then that'll get rid of that those major lines that we see in the hologram. Alright, that's looking pretty good. The next step which we're going to do is we're going to add a bit of random flickering to the hologram. Now this is a really neat trick that I found out quite recently, and it's really nice. Like it does the job very well. So if I go Shift A, add an input value node, and then plug that into the multiply. Sorry. Plug that into the multiply, and then hit I on that value to initiate keyframing. Once we've hit that, we're going to save this project. We're going to go back to previous. We're going to click on our screen layout selection, switch to animation. Now what we want is this F-curve editor. So I'm going to open it, click on it, hit Control and up arrow. Now I want to modify this curve to be a random curve. So I'm going to hit N and I'm going to add a modifier to it. The modifier is going to be noise. Now this noise isn't quite noisy enough for me, so I'm going to change the depth to, no, I won't change the depth. I will change the amplitude. Do they have amplitude? Strength. Strength to maybe 2 times what it was. I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to the compositor. And then you'll notice as you scrub through the frames, it changes to a random value near 0.5. Now that is fun. That is fantastic. And it is a pretty cool thing to have. Now that we have our object, it's looking quite neat. I might just down this blur a bit, maybe do 12. A bit more than 12. We'll go 24. And instead of having, yes, that's good. So that looks pretty good to me. And we're adding it to the footage. Now we might just up this factor because I don't think it's quite bright enough. I like it nice and bright. The other thing we can do to up this factor is we can go ahead and change this value by going back to the other menu. But once we've got that, I'm going to go ahead and add some glare because that's the next step. Now the best glare to add is after the scale node, Shift A, color, sorry, filter, glare, put that in, change the type to ghost. So that will, what that will do is that'll make the glare a lens flare, which is shaped depending on what the shape is of the object, which is physically accurate, which is so much better. And we're going to change the threshold and we're going to move it down to about 0.7 and maybe 0.8. Okay, that looks brilliant. Cool. Alright, our hologram is starting to take shape. Now, one thing I thought about this hologram is I studied a few pictures of holograms, and generally holograms, you'd think they'd be like TVs. When it's brighter, the glare from the sun reduces the brightness of the holograms. But all the pictures I studied, they acted like they were physically in the scene. And if this hologram was physically in the scene, there would be a shadow right there under the bridge. So we're going to add that back in. I'm going to go to the motion tracking screen, and I'm going to go back to the Solve tab. Okay, so what we want to do is create a plane track, and we're going to select these points, the same ones as we used for the other plane track. I'm going to hit Create Plane Track. We're going to align that to where the shadow is, under the bridge. And if you go ahead and scrub through, it sticks onto the bridge nicely, just as the other one does. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to extend that down below it, just so that we don't get any artifacts on the bridge itself. Anyway, that's looking very nice. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go back to compositing. Now we only need this shadow part to be black. We only need it for its darkness. So what we're going to do is we are simply going to use it for exactly that. So I'm going to hit Shift A, add a input, add a distort, plane track deform, choose our clip, choose the other plane track, not the hologram. I'm going to use this plane, and I'm going to add a color invert node. It is now become a shadow. I'm then going to blur it, so I'm going to add a filter blur. Let's change it to fast Gaussian. Plug the image in, change the size to about maybe 24, and then I'm going to multiply it with our original footage. So once after this add we've got here. Alright, so what we're going to do is, once we get to this level, is we are going to plug a Shift A color mix node in the middle there. We're going to change the type to multiply. Anytime you want to darken something, multiply is a great node to use. Now make sure this is before the glare, so that the part that is being multiplied out doesn't affect the glare. I'm going to then plug this blur into the image. And straight away we've got a shadow on our hologram, and then I'm going to go ahead and type 0.7 to bring that value down a bit. And that's looking good. I might up the blur a little bit, change it to 36 along the X. And that's looking spunky, that's looking great. Alright, so now our hologram is pretty much done. We have only one main step left to go, and that is to roto out or mask out this section of the pillar here. Now because of the track points we added earlier, this is going to be extremely easy. So I'm going to go ahead down to this image section down here. I'm going to select viewer node. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mask out this pillar. So I'm going to hit Control click. Sorry, I've just got to change this type to be mask, and then I'm going to Control click on the footage. One down here, one all the way over here, one all the way up here, and then hit T, and then toggle cyclic, so our mask gets closed. I might grab this one, just move it up a bit. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scale the feather of this mask. So hit AA to select the whole mask, Shift F, anyway, mask, transform, scale feather, Alt S, scale it about that much, maybe scale the whole mask down a bit, so S, scale the mask so it's halfway between that pillar there, just so it bleeds a little bit over the edge. And then I'm going to assign this mask to the track points. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to choose this top one, hit N, hit N, and then change the active point parent to the movie file, object, camera, and then the track to be top mask. And then this bottom one, I'm going to do exactly the same thing, except choose bottom mask. Now if we scrub through our footage, the mask stays exactly where it should. And perhaps what we might want to do is just move it over a little bit, just so that it's in exactly the right spot for the whole footage. And that's looking good. Okay, we are ready to use this mask. So go ahead in your main footage and add a Shift A input mask. We're going to mask out the section which is occluded by this pillar. Now that actually should happen before the glare node, just to make sure that you're not seeing glare from a region that isn't there, as always. So what I'm going to do is before this glare node, I'm going to use this mask, and before the scale, that's also important. I'm going to Shift A, output, viewer, just have a look at the mask. And if we look at the mask, we'll notice straight away that it is not there. And the reason it's not there is because we haven't selected it. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. And there it is. Magic. Ta-da. And our mask, it is currently the wrong way. We don't want this bit of the footage. We actually want the opposite. So I'm going to add a color invert node. Chuck that in there. That's perfect. That's what we want. Okay, now our footage, we are going to, after the scale node, I'm going to mask the footage out. So add a Shift A, color alpha over, stick that in there, make the factor, oh, whoops, delete that, don't even need that. This is magic. Just plug that invert straight into the factor of the add. Ta-da! All of a sudden, we have masked our footage effectively. Now, the only thing we might want to do now is, now we can't control the factor of our display here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to, before it actually gets into the factor, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add a color ramp converter, color ramp. And then if you want to go ahead and remove some of the lighter portions or the parts that are in the footage, you're going to just select this part, color here, and then dial it down a little bit. Then you can just watch as the alpha of that hologram dissipates. Alright, that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Now, the last step is to color correct our footage. So I'm going to zoom in to the very end here. I'm going to hold Shift, cut across these to make them into a little nodelet. I'm going to Shift A, add a color balance. This is a very powerful color correction node, underutilized, but it should be used a lot more. I'm going to drop the lift a bit, lift the gamma, and drop the gain just a tiny bit. Maybe actually I'll go up with the gain. Now this is really by taste. Do what you like. I'm going for sort of a filmy style color grade here. In the lows, I'm going to shift them towards a yellow color. It's looking pretty good. In the mids, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. And then in the highs, I'm going to split and go up to the blue. Beautiful. Maybe I'll make that a bit more extreme. Drop that. Cool. Now, because we're editing SLR footage, it's always nice before you put your footage, your CG element in, which is what I've done, to what you can do is you can actually add a bit of a sharpness to the image. So I'm going to add a filter, and then change it to sharpen. Now this is going to be extreme sharpening. We don't want that. We're going to set the factor to 0.1. That looks a lot nicer. Now, this scene is looking fantastic. We're just about ready to render. If you wanted to, which is what I did in the original scene, you can actually add a alpha mask around this hologram and make it blend in a bit better with the concrete, which is what I did. I'm not going to do it now. It'll take a little bit of time, but it'll be worth it. And the way you do that is you essentially just make a group node which includes a dilate node, taking the alpha channel of our mask plane here, and then a blur node, and then combine them together, and then you get an inset effect, which is a really nice effect to have. So to render this, I'm going to go ahead, switch to the render tab, switch this back to 100%, and then I'm going to go down to the handler, switch to H.264, encoding, H.264, that's fine. And then I'm going to select wherever I want my output to be. I'm just going to leave it in the temporary directory. I'm going to call it render and hit accept. And I'm going to go ahead and hit animation. And that's about it. Thanks for watching. This has been a free VFX tutorial. I hope you guys like it. I hope you subscribe. There's a lot more to come, so stay tuned, and thanks for listening.